Hey everybody, it's Brian Burns and welcome to this episode of Career Advice. Today I want to talk to you about loose connections. Now we all know what tight connections are. Those are our friends and our circle of friends, our family, the circle of people around our family, people we went to school with, the people that we know. We know their names, we have their phone numbers, we occasionally see them at parties, our social circle, our tribe, essentially, and we feel comfortable within that tribe. But today we have the capability of extending that through what I call loose connections, but active loose connections, not just connections. And the distinction is that you actually put some level of effort, some tiny bit of effort into staying in touch at some level. It doesn't have to be a phone call. It doesn't have to be email. It can just be a comment, a like, sharing a picture of what you're doing. Now, this means both business and social. And some people really encourage to share your social life on Instagram and Facebook. I'd say as long as it's politically correct and socially correct. No one wants, I'm sure your boss doesn't want to see you loaded at a party or anything, nor do, I'm not sure why anyone thinks their dinner is that important to anybody else, but whatever works for you. I don't have a strong opinion on it. I don't do it because my life isn't that interesting from a what I'm eating standpoint. Certainly it's not interesting. But what I typically share is content about what I do, what the sales, how sales is changing, social selling, internet tools that I'm using, techniques that I'm using, ways of reaching people and connecting with them without pitching and pushing, without being creepy or stalking. I share those things on social, like this, like the podcast. I share, how I do things, how I've changed doing things. But the power of loose connections is overlooked because they're like, putting away, 10% of your income in savings. This makes almost no sense in your 20s, right? Because you get tons of bills, you don't have much money, and the idea of saving for 4 years from now is pretty low on the priority list. You want to have some fun, you want to, get Netflix or be able to go out to dinner or go away for a weekend. I totally get it. But in our network, we have to extend it. Keep extending it, keep feeding it, because what research has shown is that most jobs, most opportunities are not from our tight connections. They're not from so much our family and our tight circle of friends, although they can be. Most cases, they're from a second degree or maybe even a third degree of our circle of friends. So the idea is to constantly be expanding that level 2 of our circle, that these are people that we're connected to, but we really don't have a consistent communication path with. And the reason we need to feed it is that when we need it, we would like it to be there and not just as a take. If people see us as a giver, somebody who, shares, valuable content, gives insightful comments, shares funny things and spiteful things, inspiring things on social, you're seen as somebody who contributes. And then when the time comes to ask for an introduction, ask for advice, ask for help, people are much more open to doing it, much more open to speaking up for you, to refer you to somebody else, to open up their network and their connections to you. Now, this is insanely powerful, and the reason people don't get it is because there's no payoff today. Too many of us, we look at, stimulus response. If we do an hour of work, we want an hour of pay. And that's a reasonable way to look at the world. But the problem is that we have to look at it more as compounding. And the power of compounding is, the seventh wonder, eighth wonder of the world, Warren Buffett said. And if you ever get to see his documentary on HBO, watch it. And I've got an interesting story about that I've shared on my other podcast, is when I was a little kid, me and my dad were talking, and, I was just a stupid little kid, second grade or whatever. And, I guessed at how much money he made a year. And I guessed this huge number at that time, whatever it was. And my dad laughed and he said, well, if I made that much money every year, we could live off of the interest. And I go, well, what's interest? He goes, interest is what banks pay or financial institutions for the use of your money. Like the inverse of the mortgage. You're paying the mortgage for the use of the bank's money to own your house. That's your mortgage payment. When you give a financial institution either through a bond or interest-bearing account, you get paid interest. That's your reward, your service for letting them use your money for that period of time. Now, that idea stuck with me through my whole life. And it really almost became a goal in my 30s where I was like, how much would I have that I could live off of the interest? I could live off of the proceeds of my investments. And that excited me because it seemed like that was so powerful. Now, if you apply that to your network, it's like, when can I live off of my network, where I can ask my network for favors in exchange for what I've done for them over the years. Ask them for reviews on podcasts, ask them to, download my free ebook, make them aware of courses that I offer, make them aware of products that I use, and expose them to people, friends of mine, and become part of my network. Now, you as listeners are part of my network. I'm providing, hopefully, some value to you, some ideas, some different ways of looking at life, some lessons that I've learned that you may not have learned yet, or you may have forgotten or need a little refreshing, maybe. And in exchange for that, you share the content, you connect up with me, and we become loose connections. And, and I'll also tell you a story about why it's valuable. Now, I get pitched on my other podcast because it's super popular in the sales category. It's like number one by far in the business-to-business sales category. I've been doing it for almost 9 years now, long before podcasting was popular or anyone even listened. I remember when there was like less than 100 people listened because you had to listen on a computer or move it to your iPod to be able to listen to it. But I kept doing it because, I don't know, whether it was practice or I was experimenting. And I took a hiatus for a year, and then I got back into it because I started listening to podcasts again, and it started growing, and it was doubling every year, then tripling, and I really liked it. And that compounding effect I really enjoyed. And, I've tried different mechanisms, and that was a way of me building my network. And then all of a sudden, the products that I was using, people were asking me, can you, share this with the audience? Then I get pitched by authors, that want to share their book. And, and this is what it typically sounds like. They're not connected to me. They have their PR agency contact me. They give me a standard pitch. They don't know anything about the podcast. They've never listened to it. And I typically ignore them. Mostly because they're not a match, not because I want my ring kissed or anything. But once in a while, there'll be the person who gets it. They listen to an episode, they'll reference the episode, they'll send a picture of their review that they gave the podcast, and then they'll do the ask that they have a client that they think would make a great match. And when I see that, it certainly gets my attention. And if it's a match, I'm going to go for it out of reciprocation. And this is ingrained in us, this need for reciprocation. It's been talked about forever, made famous by the book Influence by Robert Cialdini. But the studies, every picture you look at a museum where you see two tribes meeting, or, from one community to the other, there's one of two things that happens. One, they either give each other gifts, or two, they kill each other. So you have the choice. You can either kill each other or give each other gifts, or I guess today we ignore each other or block each other. So that ability to build that network, and that example of how even the podcasting, of how, the doubling and tripling and being able to reach an audience that, in some cases is bigger than Dreamforce, which is like the conference for sales people. When it's that big, and all of a sudden I can do it from, my studio and reach that number of people is pretty powerful. So I have access to loose coupling with listeners, and I can make them aware of things that could help them, and they can choose to look at them or not look at them. That is the power of loose connection. Now, does that mean you do a podcast? No, it doesn't mean that. You don't have to do a lot. You could be a guest on a podcast. You could share someone else's podcast. You could comment and review someone's podcast. You could, comment and share on other things. If you're in the B2B space, you really should have LinkedIn. I've got the free course on LinkedIn on the website. Just go to b2brevenue.com, training, and then click on the very first link at the top on how to crush your number. It goes to all the training courses. It's free. It shows you how to do a great profile. It has several reviews of profiles. If you want me to review yours, I'll try and get to it. I can't promise. I get a lot of requests, but most of them have the same issues. Almost all of them have the same issues. So what I tried to do was to do like 5 or 6 of them, and they point out all the major issues. But there you can connect and have these loose connections to build your network. Now, if you're in B2C, probably Facebook and Instagram are better choices for you. And you can start expanding your circle of connections and influence so that when the time comes when you need something, you have some currency to give them, meaning that you've given enough that they know you and they're aware of you. So don't discount loose connections. I think they're insanely valuable, and I think they're well worth your time. Please connect with me on LinkedIn. If you're not on LinkedIn, I'm on Facebook, Brian Burns on Facebook. You can see me there. I've got welcome your connection there, as well as Instagram, Twitter, Brian G. Burns on Twitter, Maverick Method, or Brian Burns on YouTube. There's about 800 videos if you're a video person. And thanks for listening.